A Chinese female tourist was on a sightseeing dive in Indonesia, but due to a slip of her hand, she accidentally dropped her $1,000 camera. She immediately dove down to chase after and retrieve the camera, but before she could even catch her breath, a shark suddenly appeared right in front of her eyes. Later, her body was discovered on the seabed nearly 100 meters deep, and the underwater camera recovered alongside her happened to record the entire process of her tragic death. This is the story we are covering in this episode, the Kakaban Island Diving Tragedy in Indonesia. Kakaban Island is located in the East Kalimantan province of Indonesia. It belongs to the Derawan Islands. The island covers an area of 7.74 square kilometers. In the local language, Kakaban means embrace. This can also be seen from the satellite map. The upper part of the island features an inner lake surrounded by mangroves. The lake is about 17 meters deep and sits slightly above sea level. The water here is calm. It is home to thousands of non-venomous jellyfish across 4 different species. However, Barracuda Point on the other side displays a completely opposite wildness and extremity. As an open ocean drop-off reaching a depth of 100 meters. It has a steep slope, and the currents are much stronger. Upwellings and downwellings frequently bring rich nutrients to the shallow waters, nourishing a vast amount of marine life, including corals and fish. And among them, the Kalapadua dive site attracts rare thresher sharks from the deep ocean to the shallow waters due to the morning cold upwellings. For diving enthusiasts, this is one of the few places where you can observe thresher sharks. On May 1, 2025, a 30-year-old Chinese female tourist, Zhang Xiaohan, arrived in Indonesia along with 12 other tourists and 3 guides, and checked into a resort on the neighboring Marachua Island. Among them, Zhang Xiaohan from Shanghai held a DM-level diver certification. In recreational diving, DM is the abbreviation for dive master. Although a dive master is not an instructor level, it serves as the starting point of professionalism. Earning a DM license means no longer being just an ordinary recreational diver, but rather a professional capable of assisting instructors with teaching, familiar with various diving emergency procedures, and fully aware of underwater risks. Yet sometimes, it is precisely this so-called professional credential that can warp judgment regarding risks to some extent. On the first day of the tour, the group mainly conducted diving activities in calm waters like the Jellyfish Lake on Kakaban Island. Around 8 a.m. on May 2nd, Zhang Xiaohan, along with the other tourists and dive guides, came to the Kalapadua dive site, attempting to catch a glimpse of and photograph the extremely rare thresher sharks. As a routine sightseeing dive, the group went down to the recreational diving limit depth, which is about 30 meters underwater to observe. Whether Zhang Xiaohan actually managed to photograph any thresher sharks this time remains unknown. However, once the scheduled time arrived and the dive guide gave the signal to head back, the entire team began ascending along the wall in an orderly fashion. Around 9 a.m., the group ascended to 5 meters below the surface and began their 3-minute safety stop before surfacing. This is a standard procedure in recreational diving. The purpose is to allow the body to adjust to pressure changes and reduce the risk of decompression sickness. Yet right during this stop, an accident happened. The GoPro camera Zhang Xiaohan was carrying accidentally slipped from her hand, plunging into the deep blue abyss below. Whether she could not bear to lose the camera or the footage she had captured. In a moment of desperation, Zhang Xiaohan immediately dove down to try and catch the falling camera. The dive guide beside her also chased down with her. After finally retrieving the camera at a depth of about 25 meters, before they could even sigh with relief, the camera slipped away once more and continued to plunge. Just as the dive guide followed Zhang Xiaohan on a second descent to grab the camera, a thresher shark suddenly appeared. At this moment, Zhang Xiaohan seemed to be captivated. Meanwhile, the dive guide's air tank was running critically low. After a brief communication between the two, the dive guide decided to surface first. But after that, Zhang Xiaohan never returned. Her companions on the surface realized something was wrong and immediately called the police. During this time, 3 dive guides led local divers into the water for an initial search, but found nothing at all. The Coast Guard arrived at 11 a.m. As multiple search and rescue boats assembled on the sea, the entire dive site area was completely locked down. A joint team composed of officers, volunteers, and local civilian divers launched a grid search at the scene. However, because Barracuda Point features a steep wall, the massive depth and strong currents made the search highly difficult. The missing diver was not found that day. The search operation continued on May 3rd. The specific plan included, first, conducting an underwater search in the area near the incident site. Second, deploying 5 speedboats for a surface search. Third, planning to deploy an aircraft to scan for suspected targets from the air. Considering how exceptionally strong the currents were here, everyone held on to a glimmer of hope for a while, thinking she might have been swept away by turbulent currents and drifted to another part of the sea. But after a prolonged search, the news that no one wanted to face finally arrived, because the location was too deep. It was well beyond the limit that any recreational diver could reach. Without specialized professional equipment, no one dared to risk going down to perform a recovery. Not until 2:55 p.m. that afternoon, 31 hours after the incident, did the professional rescue team recover Zhang Xiaohan's body from a depth of 87 meters. The body was then transported to Tanjung Bata Port, and then transferred to a local hospital for an autopsy, with the initial cause of death determined as drowning. On May 6, the victim's family arrived in Barao Regency to receive her body. Zhang Xiaohan's GoPro camera was also recovered and was returned to her family through the police. It is worth mentioning that the widely circulated video online showing a struggle against the currents was actually not filmed by Zhang Xiaohan's camera, because the victim's family chose not to release the footage, though the current strength at the time was likely similar, due to the lack of critical detailed evidence such as camera records. Exactly how Zhang Xiaohan perished can no longer be verified, but what is certain is that she most likely did not intentionally dive down to 87 meters, because whether it is PADI or SSI, all recreational diving organizations set 40 meters as the absolute limit. At this depth, nitrogen under high pressure significantly impairs brain function. Most people experience a nitrogen narcosis reaction similar to feeling drunk. Meanwhile, the no decompression limit becomes extremely short. Any slight mishap will expose you to severe decompression sickness upon surfacing. Even if you are naturally gifted or manage to push through nitrogen narcosis by pure luck, you still cannot bypass the maximum operating depth of 56 meters. Beyond this depth, the very oxygen that human life depends on can turn into a lethal poison at any moment. At this point, no amount of physical fitness will help. Staying underwater even a moment longer can trigger acute central nervous system oxygen toxicity. Once convulsions occur at this depth, it almost always ends in drowning. Therefore, the more likely scenario is that she encountered a violent downwelling at a shallower depth of 30 to 40 meters, and was forcefully dragged into the deep water by the current. During this process, due to involuntary factors such as gas depletion, nitrogen narcosis, and oxygen toxicity, she ultimately lost her life at the 87-meter mark. Although new accidents happen in the diving community every year for various reasons, looking back at the root of most tragedies, personal errors by the divers remain the primary cause. First, without returning to the surface to rest after ending the initial dive, Miss Zhang immediately performed a second deep dive, greatly increasing the risk of decompression sickness and nitrogen narcosis. Second, diving in unfamiliar waters without a guide or a buddy left her isolated and helpless when danger struck. Third, her remaining gas was completely inadequate for an emergency, and as Miss Zhang encountered and became trapped by strong currents underwater, her gas was depleted at an accelerated rate. Ultimately, after the strong currents dragged Miss Zhang to an extreme depth, the high-pressure environment triggered fatal nitrogen narcosis and oxygen toxicity, completely stripping away her ability to save herself. Although recreational scuba diving is indeed much safer compared to cave diving, which has an extremely low margin for error, it is precisely this sense of safety that causes many people to let their guard down and forget the rules once they gain experience. Yet these rules were all paid for with human lives.